Hi, I'm Owen from Rask Australia. Thanks for tuning in to the Rask Network.
Before we get into today's show, there are a few things we have to go over.
Firstly, what you're about to hear and see is limited to general information only. It's not personal financial advice like you'd get from a financial planner. Also, it's important to remember that past performance is not indicative of future performance. That means that anything that's happened in the past, or we say today, is not necessarily going to reflect what happens in the future. Lastly, please consider that any of the guests or myself are featuring on this program may have a financial interest in some of the products or shares mentioned. That's enough from me. I hope you enjoyed today's program.
Welcome to this discussion with Richard White, the founder of WiseTech Global, the ASX-listed business trading under the ticker symbol WTC. WiseTech is one of the most impressive companies on the entire ASX, even outside of its core market, which is software and technology. In this very long conversation, admittedly, we talk about some fascinating subjects with Richard, including his ability to memorize things from many, many years ago, even decades ago, and use that information to solve really complex problems in elegant and simple ways. WiseTech Global is not Richard's first company, and definitely not his first successful business at that. So we talk about his backstory and what ultimately led to the formation of WiseTech, right up to the IPO and what happened since. We talk about acquisition criteria and how WiseTech uses strategic acquisitions to expand the network, to expand CargoWise, their core software product, and capture more and more of the third-party logistics software market globally. This is a wonderful conversation for anyone that's passionate about self-improvement, but also about understanding the world and solving complex problems with technology. We talk about so much. If you're a WiseTech shareholder or a would-be shareholder, this is the conversation you absolutely want to listen to in its entirety. Thanks for watching this and attending the ASA's Virtual Investor Summit. Here's the conversation with Richard White, founder of WiseTech Global. Richard, thank you for taking some time to join me.
It's a pleasure. Great to be here.
Today we're going to talk about the business that you've built, the culture that you foster, and so many other things in between. We'll spend a lot of time on WiseTech, the business, and how you think about the past, present, and future. But I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago, and I think it was something to do with your home and it being automated. And from memory, I don't have it in front of me, but from memory, you may have even invested in an industrial version of a Tesla battery. I'm curious, what was the most rewarding part of putting that all together?
Well, the first thing is that this is the home that I grew up in. It was my grandfather built a function centre on the site, and I lived here until 1988, and then I bought it back in 2014 and renovated it. And as part of the renovations, I was driving a Tesla Model S at the time, and I had a friend that a company called Smart Commercial Solar that's very, very good at these larger installations and very smart at how to integrate things. And I wanted three-phase in the house, and I wanted the house to be a very automated house. So there's a lot more than just the Tesla battery. I have about 160 kilowatts of solar on the roof. The main battery is a 235 kilowatt-hour battery. It's quite large. It stands much taller than I do. And then on each individual dwelling, there's 9 dwellings. There's a Tesla Powerwall that runs the single phase in each of the dwellings. So it's about 400 kilowatt hours of battery and about 160 kilowatt hours on the roof, or kilowatts on the roof, which yesterday created about 700 kilowatts of power, and we had an output to the grid about 500 kilowatts of power, kilowatt hours of power. And that gets much larger in summer. So as we approach December, January, the power goes way up, and when in winter, the power goes way down. But for the whole year, I'm effectively off the grid and charge the cars with Tesla from the house, so I don't use any petrol. Basically, completely carbon neutral here. I also automated the whole house with both an access control system, a digitally driven camera system, and all the lighting is also, and everything's on my phone. I can open any door in the house off the phone. I can turn any light on and off the phone, and I can see the control systems on the phone. So it's what you would expect out of a tech guy that's interested in understanding how things are changing for the better.
For sure. So, Richard, as a recent owner of a Tesla myself, I've got to say the thought of moving almost completely off grid, if that's what you wanted to do, and also still be able to get from A to B is something that really appeals to me. So maybe in time for myself. I did hear a bit of an anecdote that it may be even a way that you think about kind of carbon emissions and these types of things and sustainability as a whole for not just yourself, but also for the business. But we can come to that in a minute. I'm curious to go back in time a bit to a younger version of yourself and where your journey started with business. Did you have any of those entrepreneurial streaks where you're selling, the cliche lemons from a lemonade stand out the front or something like this? Did you have any of that growing up?
Yeah, well, I had great exemplars. My father, who was an engineer, ran his own company. It was actually called John White Refrigeration. So he was a very, very smart engineer. My mother was very sales oriented and ran a number of businesses over her life, and she's still alive. In fact, she lives here in the area. And my grandfather ran the function centre, so he was quite an entrepreneur, well known in the area. I was named after my grandfather, in fact. And my grandmother was a very strong operational manager and managed all the staff, kept the whole place running, was extraordinarily capable of operating, what was quite a large business. And on any Friday or Saturday night, there would be upwards of 500 guests at a reception or two receptions, which could run in parallel at the site. And so I had all these examples of things I could see as I was growing up. And at the age of 12, I started working in the function centre, actually washing the dishes, this huge industrial dishwasher. It was much bigger than I was, and I had to sort of load all the dishes up in a trolley and put it inside the dishwasher and spin it around and unload the dishes. And I was working with adults, and I was feeling very, engaged because this was an exciting thing. And my grandparents, I think quite deliberately, encouraged this of me, but they also made a ritual of giving me my weekly pay packet, which was on a Friday afternoon, a little brown envelope with cash in it. I don't really remember how much money that was, and I don't know what I did with the money. It's completely invisible to me. But what I do remember is the pride and the feeling of engagement that I got from receiving a reward for the effort that I put in. And that was, working with adults, feeling like I was contributing and actually being rewarded for doing that. That was a very important lesson. I grew up working in the centre, working in the kitchen, then behind the bar, probably well underage to work behind the bar, working as a waiter, and then eventually selling functions. And I also went to Bexley Primary School, which is only really 3 blocks from the front door of my house, and then eventually to Sydney Technical High School, which is only about 6 blocks. I walked in either direction to the schools. And my father's factory was about 150 metres from the front door of the Sydney Technical High School, and I would walk from the gate of the high school down to my father's factory, and I would work in the afternoons in the factory until he would go home for dinner, and he would take me home, and I would learn welding and things about electrical circuits and about compressors and about physics and about all these other things that my father knew about. And he also had a workshop at home where he would restore classic cars, and I would spend time with him, pulling the cars apart and putting them back together and learning to use my hands on, very sophisticated things that my father knew how to do. So it was a great childhood, and I learned extensively through that time, and I saw entrepreneurship happening. I saw businesses, the businesses that they ran, going through the successes and failures and struggles and successions of things. So it was very instructive, very powerful.
It sounds like particularly that first one where everything nowadays, when it seems to come to teaching young kids about money, or even ourselves, to be honest, adult kids, the ability just to tap and to, use Apple Pay or something like this, and you don't really often see the true value of money like put in front of you. And at the end of the week, that brown envelope that you would get gave you that sense of pride. I just don't know how we instill those values today as much. But the hard work element's still important, right? Still important.
It wasn't the money, of course. It was the brown envelope. And so I don't think it's the cash part of it. I think it's the concept of being rewarded for doing something and having that reward connected to, effort, but also being in a learning environment. I mean, the other interesting thing about that childhood experience is that I was allowed to range quite freely. I could use my father's workshop. I could play in the perimeter of the function centre, crawl under the house, and look at all the old structures of the building and see the work going. So see all these other very interesting things, and I think that allowed me to feel unconstrained by the normal things in the world. I just had an ability to challenge myself, and my brother too. And my brother and I grew up in very similar circumstances. And I think that allowed me to remain very curious during my childhood and into my young adult life, and of course right through.
It's an interesting thing. I find that I speak to a lot of fund managers and even CEOs on the show, and a lot of them come to some way of solving problems. And I think there's often, not always the case, but there's often a kind of recurring theme throughout their childhood and adolescence where they have had problems put in front of them and they have to solve them within the bumper bars, so to speak, of the kind of the family home or on the farm or something like that. And it seems to come up again and again and again. If I'm not mistaken, when I was doing some background reading, I'm pretty sure it was your father. I could be wrong here, Richard, so please correct me. Your father who said to you he wants you to do a trade, but you wanted to move into, I guess, the music or creative industry. Is that correct?
The way I would explain that's roughly correct, but the way I'd explain that is by year 10 in high school, I'd become a reasonably accomplished guitar player. I moved from, my mother bought me a chord organ, and then I played the ukulele for a little while. This is like a 4-string version of the guitar. Same string tunings, but different pitch, but same intervals, and same fingerings for the top 4 strings of the guitar. And then I played the trumpet in the school band, and then I eventually picked up the guitar, and I was actually good enough that my school friends wanted me to join their bands and then have jam sessions and so forth. And I started thinking that I wanted to be a rock star. In the year ahead of me, in Sydney Technical High School, Les Gock, who was the guitarist from a band called Hush, which was very famous in the 70s, was there. And I thought, I could be like that. And my friends and I, on graduation from high school, we decided to go full tilt as a band. My father said, well, I'll allow you to do it, but you really have to do a trade as well. And so I would, play on the weekends and at nights during the week in various places all over Sydney and Wollongong and Newcastle and elsewhere, whilst attending a technical college and doing refrigeration, which I did finish, and I've got a pretty decent understanding of how refrigeration works. And for instance, I did the designs for the cooling for the data centers, which is a strange sort of connection because I understand, that sort of stuff. Because my father didn't give me just training; he taught me really deep, basic ideas, the principles rather than the practice. And so I understand how the physics of those things works, and so easy to use. I did do both, but I didn't continue as a refrigeration person because, I found the music industry far more interesting, and I never really wanted to follow in my grandparents' or my parents' footsteps. I wanted to learn from them. I didn't want to copy them.
I think it was David Kochie of all places that I heard about this first, but then your life kind of like ebbed and flowed, and you ended up with a business that repaired guitars. Is that correct? Or musical equipment?
Yes. Some of that Koch thing is actually wrong because I've heard him talking about that, but I'll correct it here.
Okay.
So I played in the band for a number of years, but I realised that it was a very, very tough industry to work in, and you've got a lot of fame and attention, but you've got no money. And I really like the idea of being able to support myself and not being, not being able to pay the rent and feed myself. And so I did do quite a bit of work teaching guitar, but that's also not a particularly, a wealthy industry. And then it's hard to manage that on a continuous basis. So I started repairing my own guitars. And then friends started asking me about their guitars. And then suddenly, because you're gigging around, you're talking to people. You run into people like I ran into Angus and Malcolm Young at the Arana Hall in Hurstville. And Angus sort of said, "Can you look at my guitar?" And I ran into Rick Brewster and the Angels at Corrimal near Wollongong. And we became friends, and I started repairing his guitars. And I did work for Ian Moss, and I did work for Tommy and Phil Emanuel and, many other people. And I was just very good at it. And it was because it was a combination of the engineering skills that my father had taught me and the playing skills that I'd learned. And that was a great business. It was very profitable. It was extremely well known in the industry. It was called Rock Repairs. And I eventually moved into town and next to a business called Guitar City, where I had a steady flow of customers. But I realised at the end that it was a service business, and it couldn't scale because it was my two hands and my skill that was what was on sale. And so I eventually sold that business to my co-worker, who was a guitar technician as well, and started building lighting equipment, which was much more industrial. And I could understand it better, and I was sort of building it up on the weekends whilst working in the guitar repair business during the week. Friends would bring me various types of lighting and say, "Can you replicate this? Can you improve this? Can we build more of these?" Because I had a workshop at home from my father and I had the industrial skills, I started building that. That became a very big business very quickly.
How big are we talking for that business?
I don't even remember. It moved in 4 different times because the factories that I had put it in, I started building in about 100 metres from where I'm sitting now in a workshop that my father had. Then I moved into a factory in Peakhurst, and that we ran out of space there, so I moved to a factory in Alexandria, then a factory in Five Dock, and then eventually I merged the business with Jan's Electronics, which was a very big entertainment, audio, lighting, and concert production company in Sydney, where I became the R&D manager. But the business was turning over many millions. I don't recall how many. About the 80s now. It's not something I can track.
Yep.
But it was an interesting learning experience because it's what actually eventually got me into computing.
I want to talk about that in just a moment, but if I'm not mistaken, there was some article, or maybe you said it, I can't remember where I read this, but someone had brought to you a problem with a concert, and that someone had ordered all the AV equipment and it was the wrong equipment. So you had to quickly manufacture something, and then it became the standard for the industry. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so that's sort of mid-career in the lighting manufacturing. Ray Hawkins, who was the lighting designer for the Angels, came to me with this concept that was for the No Exits tour of the Angels, and they had this idea of these pin spots, and they were using small things called Par 36 pin spots, which are quite weak, and they were trying to create prison bars on the stage. So Ray wanted to do something, and I had been working on parabolic reflectors, which is it's a way of shaping a beam. And we got the idea, and we sort of experimented with one piece of equipment, got it working, and then I had all the parabolic the reflectors manufactured. I had the metal spinning was done in my factory, and then the plating for the reflectors was done in a special company that does that for a plating service. Got them all back. I sent Ray Hawkings out with an order. This is getting very tight on the timelines. The tour was sort of happening in a few days, and I sent him out, and he picked up the wrong bulbs, the wrong lights, and now we had no time. And I looked at what we had, and I sort of built a little standoff that sat at the bottom of the light, and I pushed the light forward, got it to the right focal point. These bulbs were fantastic. They were really, really bright, and they were very, very small. The filament was very small, and so it gave this incredibly intense light. So I named the light the ray light because it was Ray's accidental but very valuable mistake that caused it. And it became a standard. You can even still see them today. It's somewhat been overtaken by things like Very lights and by LED lighting. But the ray lights are still an unassailable icon. You can see them all over the world, many places that build them, because once you create that model, everybody goes, well, that's a fantastic thing. I want that too. A complete accident. Creative accident, and you've got to basically figure out that you make it work because you have to make it work. This what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention.
I guess it illustrates also your ability to creatively solve problems, having that kind of underpinning and the foundations of engineering. I'd like to turn everyone's attention to a speech that you did, but you also have I guess an abbreviated version on the WiseTech website, which was a speech you gave at UTS, which was 5 life lessons to challenge the status quo. One of those was follow your own path, don't be constrained by stereotypes. Realize that success, talent, and passion are long-term developments. You'll work outside your comfort zones, endure hardships and stumble at times, but be resilient, resourceful, and keep moving towards your goals. So already, Richard, we've seen you kind of move through different businesses and different ideas that seem to have been quite successful. And I guess a lot of people, when they think about their career or their businesses or business, they feel like they're just surrounded by uncertainty, and we go into this kind of narrow view of the world, like I'm going to be in this industry for the rest of my career, or at least in this kind of general field. Or if it's in business, as the business grows, we tend to become, more constrained by the fear of what could be outside of our core circle of competence. So I'm curious how the idea of not being constrained to stereotypes, to use your own words against you, so to speak, map to your own journey and like the founding of WiseTech and all these types of things. I hope that's not a butchered way to ask this question, but I'm curious, what gave you the courage to then go and start WiseTech?
One of the things that's perhaps a personality trait is I'm not really frightened by risk. I'm not frightened by uncertainty. I'm actually interested in those things because out of uncertainty, almost all value and opportunity comes. Risk is effectively the inversion of opportunity. If you have risk, you can turn that into something. If you remove the risk, you can make it into a successful product or a capability. I remember in the early days when I was starting, aggressively in the computer industry, not knowing how to do something, being asked by somebody to do some piece of technology, and I didn't know how, but I'd say, yeah, okay, I'll do it, and then I'd go and figure out how to do it. And I had no idea at the beginning. I just had confidence in the fact that I could solve the problem and that I could learn and that I could ask questions, read things, study something, experiment, trial and error, various other things. And you'd always come up with a suitable solution to that problem. And so I was in high demand because I could make things happen and I wasn't constrained by the fear that this was new that nobody knew how to do it. It was just a question of, well, you've got to get it done. So again, it's that same necessity thing.
Do you think that your upbringing and the ability to just roam around, the grounds where you are and to go into the tool shop or the workshop, and go and solve problems, do you think that was the grounding for that, or do you reckon this is something innate with you?
The nature versus nurture question is always really complicated to answer. I don't actually know the answer, and I can't speak to my genetics. Of course, no one really can. But I can tell you a little story from my childhood that's quite material.
Sure.
In year 2 in primary school, I was left-handed.
Oh.
And my teacher, this is at a time when we had much sterner educational strategies, would whack me lightly, but she'd whack me on the knuckles on the left hand if I used the pen in the left hand. And so I changed over the course of the term to my right hand. And my writing is appalling. I mean, I truly have the worst writing you would ever imagine, still today. And how I solved the problem is I stopped writing.
Right.
So in classes, I would just set myself the need to remember everything. So quite early on in my learning experience, I challenged myself to remember using my memory rather than by writing. Now, later on, when computers became, highly available, I just type everything, so there was no problem with writing. But I actually think that was a seminal problem that got solved by me saying, well, I can't even read my own writing, so I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to have to remember everything, and so I'm going to apply my memory. Instead of giving up, I went the other way and turned it into a superpower. My memory is extremely strong, particularly for technical detail. I can remember all sorts of stuff. I can remember reading a book in 1983 called the CMOS Cookbook, another one called the TTL Cookbook. I learned electronics and taught myself. The 555 Cookbook and the OPAB Cookbook. I read those books. Suddenly I was an electronics engineer.
Right.
Now, it's just memory is a very, very powerful tool, and it's a predictor of intelligence as well.
So is it just through brute force? Like you just sat there and you thought, I have to remember this? Like, were there any skills that you developed early on to commit those important things to your memory?
I think it's a combination of my skill with language is obviously I'm fluent, and I have a style of speaking and a way of computing with English that's very powerful. My mother developed this because I was an avid reader, and she would feed science fiction books she'd almost shove them in through the bedroom door, and I'd consume them, and then they'd fly at the other end. I'd read all of the Asimov series, Arthur C. Clarke, Michael Moorcock, Robert Heinlein, hundreds of, and I even had in my wardrobe, my mother put a set of encyclopedias, and late at night when I was supposed to be asleep, I would sneak out and pull out an encyclopedia, and I'd read the encyclopedia. I got about halfway through. I got to about the letter M or something before I ran out of time. But that's a hell of a big job to read encyclopedias. But it was just a way of, it's like muscle. It's like bodybuilding. You're building your mind. You're actually lifting energetically with your mind. And so for me, I didn't have memory tricks. I just had really good memory. Anything that interests me, I'm incredibly good at remembering. If you said to me, can you get some milk on the way home, I'd definitely forget that. But if you say, here's this interesting thing about software development, and here's the model, and here's how you do it, I'd remember that, and I'd research and I'd find all about it, and it would just become stuck in my memory.
So nowadays, do you use any type of note-taking, like do you have Apple Notes? Like, do you use Evernote, anything like that to support you these days? Or is it still... I
occasionally make notes in Word or Notepad or on my phone, but they're very much just a few dot points. I mean, typically I'm a dot pointer.
Okay.
So you can, with ChatGPT and with other tools, you can record everything, but I don't particularly like listening to a diatribe of conversation. I want to extract out of that the essentials and not be bothered by this morass of detail. There's little things that make sense in there, and you can. I still read avidly. I'm still a very strong reader.
I was going to ask you there. Is there it's your ability then? If you have this ability to retain so much, do you find yourself actively tuning out of things that you don't think are relevant to that? Like you don't want to commit in there? Does that make sense? Like, do you selective?
I probably cut off things when there's no useful purpose in regurgitating something. Okay. I mean, if I've already heard it and I've read it, I don't need somebody to summarize it for me again, because I don't need to remember it a second time. I've got it. And so, I do like the interchange with people when, for instance, my communication staff and I often share a document and we tune it and we tweak it and we do all sorts of little, sophisticated things with it, because we're really quite concerned to make the text crisp and not repetitive and meaningful. But I wouldn't like, I typically don't reread books. However, that's not true of all books. I've reread a couple of seminal works that I think are very important several times, because I think the second and third time you can extract even more value off something that's really, really meaningful. So if it's a sci-fi book, I would just read it once. I don't really read any fiction anymore because I'm too busy with business, but I do like reading as a general. I find reading quite pleasurable, and if it's about something of interest, then I have a very high level of retention.
So I'm going to ask you to test your memory then. Back in the earliest days of WiseTech, what was it that led you to that? Like, why did you come up with the idea of, well, there could be software that solves this problem, or there could be technology that solves this problem? Like, what was WiseTech in the earliest days, and where did the idea come from?
I'm going to do a bit of history. So it was Richard White, musician, rock repairs, guitar repair business, very successful. Rock Industries, which was the lighting business. I was then the R&D manager at Jan's, and I had I learned a lot there. I read all those books I talked about, the CMOS cookbook and so forth there. And I did a lot of work very late at night, working weekends, really pushing myself to learn about electronics and eventually about computer programming. And I ended up really becoming quite strong with software development. That was a real watershed experience. Then there was an opportunity to sell my shares in Jan's, which I did, and I started up a company called Clear Technology, which became the distributor for Unisys and for Philips monitors and many other things. And I learned about wholesale and distribution. I sold that business in 89. So I'm a serial entrepreneur. None of these businesses were like WiseTech, but they were all successful in some form. And then I started a consulting business because I didn't have anything else to do, called Real Tech Systems Integration. I ran across two customers, one called Container in General, who became very important to me because they were very helpful at teaching me about the industry, about logistics, and another one called Expeditors, which is a very big global logistics company. And I noted from both of them that they had very poor software integration. They had lots of little bits of systems that were glued together, sometimes stuck together with what people call sneakernet. You walk the pieces of paper around the office to connect things together. And that was 89 now. And I started seeing that there was an opportunity to solve a much bigger problem. I did quite a detailed programming job in California, in Huntington Beach in 1990. And in fact, I was there when the Gulf War broke out. And that was a fulfillment system I wrote from scratch. And then I came back and started working on the idea of building an integrated logistics system. So I took all of those fragmented systems that I saw and put them into one piece of software that had everything in it. Now, that everything that we're talking about, 1993 now, it wasn't everything like WiseTech is today, but it was better than anything else in the market, and it was deeper and more capable, and it covered the main accounting system, so the general ledger, accounts receivable, payable, cash book, the forwarding system, and the custom system, which are the key points. Particularly back then, they were the things that you needed. And it had a little comms module that could send messages to each other. It had email built into it. We had an FTP file service. I could send the upgrades out automatically. No one had done this before. We had automatic upgrades, automatic database changes, automatic bug fixes. It was very, very innovative because all these ideas to me seemed very obvious. That became a very successful business. We incorporated it in 1994 to WiseTech. And by 1999, we were the dominant player in Australia. We'd actually run out of market, really, because we'd grown so much. And the only choice then was to go overseas. The product I'd written, I had envisaged I was going to be big in Sydney. It was quite big in Australia. We started moving into New Zealand and realised that you had to rewrite because its international capabilities weren't quite there. And so that sort of formed the second generation of the software. I took a bit of a detour then and did a master's degree, sort of almost accidentally. But I'll stop there because I'm going to get into the WiseTech story at a deeper level. But there was one thing that I was trying to do there was to solve a problem that I saw that was ugly and poorly dealt with. And I've had this. I have this character trait that I call a healthy disrespect for the status quo. I see things the way they are. People say, that's the way it is. And I go, I don't like it. It needs to be better than that. You shouldn't live with that. That's wrong. And so I have this, it's an uncomfortable feeling, actually, because you see lots of things that aren't perfect. And you've got to choose the ones that you're going to focus on because there's lots and lots of things in the world that you're not going to be able to change. But there's a lot of stuff that I do think I can change.
Here's just more of a team-based question, which we'll get to in a little while. But do you get frustrated when other people can't see it as well, or are you okay just keeping that inside your head? I'd
live a life very frustrated if I allowed that to be the model, because it is hard to explain to people why the thing that they're so used to and so comfortable with and so willing to use is going to have to change for something which is delightfully better. But they don't see it that way. And the number of times that I've had people tell me that I'm completely on the wrong track and this isn't going to work, and we don't want that. We just want you to have another report or another field on the screen here. We want to do this little thing. And I'm interested in a dramatic change that actually really lifts things, way through up into the future.
So how did you solve then how did you solve the problem of going internationally? Because let's go down that path. Let's continue down.
It's not one thing. In 2000, I started working on a global plan in about 1998. But what my first thing to do was to design a schema, a database, effectively, that looked at the whole world differently, and it brought all the pieces of data, all the model together in one place. We didn't really know what that was going to look like. I just had a view, and I had a tool that I was using to design this sort of data model. Because if you're doing these big systems, it has to be data driven at some level. It's just a very fundamental requirement to get the data right first, and then everything else is easy to program if you get the data right. And then in about 2000, I met a gentleman by the name of Andrew Currow that was doing a lot of work in marketing. He'd been the CEO and the marketing manager at Records and Coleman, and he had a very interesting way of looking at things. And he said that he was teaching a subject at UTS in a master's degree. And I said, well, I'd like to do that subject. And he said, well, you can just come along and sit in the class. I felt that wasn't fair. So I enrolled in the degree, but simply and only to teach, to do Andrew Currow's marketing subject. However, it was deferred to the next semester because it was full. And so I had to pretend to do something else. So I ended up doing a different subject, which I enjoyed immensely. And I realized that I could start thinking of this as a way of building business plans. And so I did the whole of the degree. And I graduated with a master's in 2002. But what I actually did was I wrote the entire business plan for the WiseTech Global expansion as part of my studies. And I basically submitted business plans as assignment. I got pretty good marks as well, and that was an extremely helpful thing because I actually thought through in 2 years all the things that I had to do to build a global business. In 2002, I took my marketing manager aside, and we were very successful in Australia, very profitable. I had a couple of $1 million in the bank. I took my marketing manager aside and I said, I'm going to start a new company inside the old company. You're not allowed to talk to them. You run the old business. I'll give you 1 hour a week of my time, and I'm going to hire new people. And I'm going to, because the problem of being successful is that you think of yourself as a winner and you don't want to change. So I built this new business, 16 people. We built the next generation product based on all that planning I did in 1998, the database design, and all the work I did in the master's degree. And that started becoming the next generation product, which was released in 2004, in April 2004. I can tell you that I showed customers from 92 to 94, and I don't think a single customer except one thought that it was a good idea. They all thought it was crazy. But one customer, Rohlik, which is a German company, their Australian operations loved it and they wanted to take it on. And when they went live, it was a complete watershed. Suddenly, it was obvious what it solved and how much more powerful it was, and that became effectively the reason why everybody else jumped on board. It became very successful in Australia. We entered New Zealand. We entered Singapore. We then bought a company in 2006 in Chicago. We opened up organically in Europe in 2007, and the company started growing very rapidly.
Can I just double click on something you said there? I just wrote it down. You mentioned that one of the problems that you have, or one of the problems that businesses have, is that if you have a successful business, you think of yourself as a winner. And this idea of like you giving 1 hour of your time to the old business and developing a new business. Is that something that you still think about today?
Yes. I approach it differently today because I think you have to create a challenger mindset in a business to be a growth business. You can be a very profitable, successful business, but eventually someone will figure out how to do it better than you if you don't have a challenger mindset. Once you think of it that you're the incumbent or the winner, you're in a danger zone because you get lazy and you stop thinking about how to challenge yourself. So creating a culture of challenge and a culture of always trying to be better and measuring what better looks like and inspiring that sort of betterment of things, it's quite an important thing. But back then I didn't know how to do that. And just starting a new business in the old business was easy because it meant that I could sort of learn how to build a new business from scratch inside the shell of the old business. And I eventually, of course, moved everybody across, but it was a way of being able to move very fast and do something very different, particularly one that was needed to be funded by the profitability of the existing business.
Do you think more businesses have scope to go and just paint a blank canvas? Like, do you think it's like the sunk cost fallacy, like to put a label on it? Like
the sunk cost problem is one of those things you think about. Sunk cost is a bit different because that's a cognitive bias, of course, but I think it's not, and it wasn't a completely new solution. What it was a massive upgrade to the existing solution. So it used all of the things that we had in the existing solution, but it left that behind. So I left a whole legacy of code which was written purely for Australia and built a system that used all of the tools, all the capability, all the thinking, all of those things that I'd actually documented in my master's degree. So I documented a lot of the things we'd done successfully, but then we built on top of it this truly international system that worked in multiple countries, multiple currencies, multiple ledgers, multiple trade lanes. It was a big, big change. And that expansion was so large that many people said, this is impossible, you'll fail because it's too big. You're trying to do something which is so fundamentally different to anybody else ever. How can it possibly be that a little Australian company can make something happen like that? But it worked.
There's a lot to go on now. I guess there's the patch of land between then and today, and that included an IPO. So can you take us up to that point and why you decided that you wanted to share this thing that you had that was so special with public investors? Like, why did you want to go to the public markets? Like, how do you reconcile that?
It might be helpful if I just walk you from that initial success through to the IPO, because
Absolutely.
There's a series of steps. The company grew quite rapidly in 2006 and 2007. And in 2007, we were experiencing what I think most people would call growth pains. We were in an industry which typically sold the software on a large upfront license fee and then a smaller annual maintenance fee. We called that one-time license plus maintenance. And I had a head of global sales that was very inclined to try to find the biggest deals possible, get the biggest upfront payment possible, and often you're negotiating away that annual fee. And this big upfront fee usually came with a lot of commitments to build things that I don't think were actually really necessary, and often were redevelopments of things that we were replacing the legacy system that we were throwing out, or they were throwing out, that were actually, because the customer didn't understand the new system, they wanted to rebuild the old system inside the new system, and it was wrong. And I was at a function, I think it was an after party for an EY function, and Mike Kennett-Brooks was there. And Mike and I were just talking about his revenue model. He talked about we charge 100% up front and then 50% per annum for maintenance. I went, that's an interesting model. But I think I can go further. I can charge zero up front and 100% a year for maintenance, which we actually made it a monthly fee. And we called it on-demand licensing, right? On-demand periodic licensing. So basically there was no cost to put the software in. You only paid when you used the software. Now that's 2007. we're now heading into 2008, which is the global financial crisis, and all capital budgets everywhere in the world were slashed, to some of them to zero. But we were not a capital budget software. Everybody else was big upfront capital fee. We were OPEX only. Nothing to install it, nothing to get it live. Only when you use it do you pay. And everybody was cutting costs. Everybody was trying to get efficiencies out of their business. And we had an operating model that was nothing up front, and you only get paid when you get efficiencies. And so we grew between 2008 and 2012, we grew 3% a month, every single month, on average.
Wow. Which
is quite a high growth rate, it's higher than it is now. And that led me to the second problem. We got through the GFC. 2011, about mid-2011, I started seeing a real problem developing, because we now had more than 100 installations backlogged. I had 27 training staff that would fly all over the world, often in economy class, often staying in reasonably crappy hotels, because the customer didn't like paying for these non-recurring costs. And I'm thinking, this is just not going to scale, because it takes us 6 months to bring up a new trainer. And so at the end of 2011, about October, I decided that the solution to how to scale the implementation team was to not have an implementation team at all. We did two things. We built content that was so rich and complete. I took 4 people out of the implementation team, and my training manager at the time had a complete meltdown, because she was saying, I'm already having trouble with 27 people. You're taking 4 people away. And I said, I don't care. We're going to, this is one of the famous slogans, one of the famous mantras, slower today, faster forever. We pulled them out. They wrote really high quality content. The goal was make it so the customer doesn't need to hire us to train. And then my colleague, Vlad Bilanovsky, he built a partner network alongside the training courses, and we certified the partner network with the same training materials that we trained our staff with. By the end of 2012, we had a complete platform. We didn't have any training staff, but we had a lot of content staff now, because I converted them over. And we had many partners who were training staff, were training customers. And that backlog shrunk to nearly zero. I lost about $5 million a year in training costs, but I gained much more than that in licensing, which is much more valuable because it's high margin business. Training is a very low margin business. Licensing is a very high margin business. And so by the end of 2012, we were really firing on all cylinders. And 2014, we'd been working since 2012 on productivity, another mantra, productivity at the center of everything, meaning our own business and our customer business. And we've been working on the third generation of software that was more productive, more complete, more capable, more scalable. And we released that in April 2014. And by 2016, we had converted all of our customers, bar a few small ones, and the company was firing on all fours. In 2005, I'd given quite a lot of the staff small amounts of options across the company. And once you start giving out options and they vest, staff are going to have some way of having a valuation and a liquidity mechanism. And you can keep it private, but it becomes increasingly difficult to do so. So you need to have a liquidity and valuation mechanism for your staff. You need to have the ability, if you're going to grow the company globally, you're going to have some way of raising capital if you want to do things. And in 2015, we bought a couple of companies in China and South Africa, and we were looking at other companies around the world. And you also, at that scale that we were starting to become, you need to have the trust of your customers that a public market with public accounts gives you. So it was the public accounts, public trust, the ability to raise capital, and the ability to give our staff a liquidity and a valuation mechanism was very important. So we listed on April the 11th, 2016. That was a Monday. I hired the Angels for the Friday night. There's a famous song that Doc Neeson wrote called "Who Rings the Bell." I got the bell from the stock exchange on the stage. I had a huge warehouse, and I got invited all the staff, and I got up and played, because I'm still a good player. I got up and played that song, "Who Rings the Bell," with the Angels, and I played "Ring the Bell" at the end on the Friday night. Was really quite a thing.
What a memory! What a great way to do it.
Yeah.
Sure beats just standing in the room with 10 people.
Well, ringing the bell was good for the press and so forth, but this was much more meaningful for the staff. And because I had a long-term friendship with the Angels, it was very meaningful because they could see this connection between me repairing Rick's guitar, then building lighting for the Angels, and then eventually hiring them for the IPO party. It was quite a continuity when you think about it.
How do you explain? So imagine, I don't know, you and I didn't meet and we didn't have this chance to talk, and we're just in the elevator together, and I introduced myself and I asked you what you do. How would you describe what WiseTech does?
Well, I would say we provide logistics execution software on a global basis to the world's largest logistics companies. And we do that across the international supply chain and around the port communities. That's our core capability. But of course, we're doing much more now than we did ever before. And in particular, we've grown successively from that sort of international piece to the borders and into the port communities and into the warehousing. So you can see that we're taking these very deliberate but quite small calculated steps to increase this addressable market of the company. Each time we're doing that with software first. We're a product-led company. We do acquisitions to make this type of growth much more effective and much safer. But it's a very stepwise process. We're doing this more globally, so we're doing it in more countries. And we're doing it by expanding into adjacent marketplaces that are reachable easily from where we stand.
Okay, I've got a few questions about the acquisitions, but I'll just follow up again on the CargoWise element, because this is just to address anything that people might be unsure of.
Sure.
Can you tell us then, who are the customers? Is it the ports themselves, or the infrastructure owners? Is it the shipping companies? Who actually pays the fee, the monthly fee?
So right back in the beginning, it was forwarders and customs brokers, customs agents that were the customers. And in the early days, it was those in Sydney and then eventually those in Australia. And in those early days, from 94 through to 99, we bought most of our competitors in Australia as well. So the product was good enough that we had a strategic competitive advantage, and I was able to buy most, but not all, of our competitors in Australia. And that was helpful because it gave us scale, because this is a very expensive industry. Building high-quality software requires scale, and having too many competitors, actually, particularly in software companies, can be problematic. If you have one very large development and it's highly efficient, you'll get a competitive scale, but you'll always get higher quality software for the same price. The company expanded. When that second generation product, we suddenly started doing, just sort of dabbling our toes in warehousing, in bonded depots, and in trucking, very small amounts. And then the main job we were doing from 2004 to 2014 was growing globally. So it was the same thing, but in many different countries. So it was easy to replicate in the sense that there was a substantial commonality going to the US or the UK or wherever. But there was also substantial differences, because every country has its own set of customs and procedures that are different. The documents have different names. Even though it should be global and should be standardized, it never is. Even in the EU, in the 27 countries of the EU, who have standardized laws and standardized procedures, every country still implements them differently. It's a remarkable craziness that we live in.
Okay, so you mentioned before that there's really no implementation team, so to speak. There's a lot of great documentation. A lot of the partners help facilitate. How do customers present to you? Do they is there a sales team that's outbound and approaching these corporates, or do they come to you now?
We have about 350 partners, and the partners effectively implement the system. And so in order for them to continue, they do provide professional services on an ongoing basis to customers, but that's a relatively small stream. Their main stream of business is new sites, new customers. And so you can think of it as we are symbiotically connected to our partner network. We never provide that implementation. I'm very, 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 very clear to the company and to the partners that we will never compete against the partners because they should do all the work. We build the software, they implement the software. That's how it goes. And that does cause a lot of inbound lead generation. They do it themselves because they're interested in winning customers as well. So that's a reciprocal or symbiotic thing. But also we have a very strong reputation. We have a very strong marketing message. We do a lot of work with customer stories, having the customers themselves talk about their success. We don't do a lot of traditional SEO or pay-per-click. That doesn't work for us at all, but we do have a lot of engagement. We've got probably 65 odd salespeople worldwide, and we have a very, very strong reputation for being the best in our class in this space.
I realised there's one question I wanted to ask you that I skipped over, which we might just tuck that in now if that's okay, which is at the time of the IPO, you mentioned that, there was, you're up there with your guitar playing a song, Monday comes, the IPO is done, gives your staff a liquidity event, right? Do you think now, like that was then, today, WiseTech is a much bigger business, financially hugely successful for investors on the stock market, for yourself, for everyone that was hopefully held onto their shares. Do you think about that a lot? Do you think about like the value that WiseTech has created beyond just the team now and for investors at large?
So the interesting thing is that the staff held onto their shares. I think there was a very strong belief in the company, certainly from myself. I didn't sell shares in 2016. And I think everybody thought that this was the beginning of something really important and therefore really powerful. And so, whilst everybody's entitled, if you're a share owner, you're entitled to sell shares, you're entitled to buy shares, you're entitled to retain your shares. I think that the first thing was that they believed in the future of the company. Some sold, but most retained their shares. And I still own 39.3 or something, 39.37% of the company. I've sold a little bit over the years, but in a very slow and controlled way, and it's not something that I'm rushing to do. I just think, providing a bit of extra liquidity and a bit of diversification for me is a good idea. But the fundamental thing here is that I put myself in the frame of thinking of the shareholders and not thinking of myself. I mean, it's easy for me because I am a very large shareholder, and so it's easy for me to put myself in the frame of what is benefiting for the shareholders. Now, in the real world, markets go up and down, businesses, not business, but the economy is volatile and the interest rates are volatile, and there's all these moving parts that you can't predict. But what you can definitely do is you can predict that you can continue to grow the company substantially by driving value through the product into markets where we can make a significant difference by improving their capabilities. You asked about who the customers were before. I should have answered that question. Our biggest customers are freight forwarders and global freight forwarders and global logistics companies. We have 24 of the top 25 largest global freight forwarders in the world use our software somewhere in the world, and 11 of those are rolling out or rolled out globally, and we have 44 of the top 50 global third-party logistics providers using our software somewhere in the world. So we're still very lightly penetrated. We've got a lot of penetration we can do and a lot of geographical expansion we can do. But there's a lot of addressable market to continue to grow into. And there's also the fact that we've been growing out at the peripheries. We've been growing into landside logistics and warehousing and so forth.
Richard, you mentioned before that in certain instances, making an acquisition is safer for WiseTech to do. A lot of people, indoctrinated in organic growth, long-term compounding, they're not as familiar. Maybe WiseTech is the exception to this in some cases, and maybe Constellation Software overseas. They're not really familiar with a lot of acquisitions going safely or going well for businesses as they scale. Can you double click on that that comment about acquisitions being safer. Like, how do you reconcile that, and how should everyone else be thinking about it as well?
Well, the first thing I would say, and you mentioned Constellation Software, that's a very valuable company. They've done acquisitions very well, but that's not our model. And that model works. But most technology companies, if you look at them closely, you'll discover the larger ones are doing acquisitions all the time. And they are typically, the acquisitions can be quite large. I mean, Microsoft just paid a huge amount of money for a gaming company, but most of the time the acquisitions that they're doing are small and they relate to a specific piece of technology or a specific team or a specific thing. Now, WiseTech is growing globally, and in order to grow globally, we need to have boots on the ground in a country that speak the language, that understand the customs procedures of that country, and that can actually help us with that. Now, if you're talking about English-speaking countries, there is some opportunity to do that organically. But even then, in English-speaking countries, where we can read the documentation, we can talk to the customs officials, we can talk to the customers or potential customers, and we can do the work, it's still very, very hard to build a foothold in those countries. If you buy a small company, we might only pay $2 to $10 or $20 million for that, that company. So it's not a big. It's not. We're not talking about sheep stations here. We're not giving away the farm. We're talking about a tiny percentage of our capital. And what you get is safety, because you have knowledgeable people on the ground. They understand the customs systems, they understand procedures. There's a lot of undocumented facts in those customs procedures that are not in any document anywhere. And for instance, calculations and small rounding errors and other things don't exist in the documentation. And all the companies that have built this, including myself in Australia and New Zealand, have to figure out where the system doesn't work quite correctly to model that system. So it's very hard to do organically. I would say it's possible in English-speaking countries, but very slow, painful, and costly. But in non-English-speaking countries, it is virtually impossible to do that without an acquisition. You need someone who speaks French or German or Spanish or Italian or Norwegian, whatever it is. And in order for them to actually be able to help with that system, they simply have to understand all these complexities that are not documented and or are very subtle and hard to understand. Imagine me going into a French company and saying, we're here to build your custom system, just trust us, we'll do it. That ain't going to happen. Whereas if you have locals that are the shareholders in the company, because most of the acquisitions we give them shares as part of the compensation or as part of the sale. So they're very bound on this. I mean, we did this in Taiwan, we've done it in China, we've done it in France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Belgium, the Netherlands, Sweden, Norway. We're going to continue to do that because it's a very successful strategy. We're not talking about large amounts of money, and we've done 46 or it might even be 47 acquisitions in that sort of number. And I can tell you that, whilst some are better than others, there are no failures here. 46. I've just been corrected. 46 acquisitions.
Can you maybe?
It's 2017.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So one of the things that I know is that basically you can make acquisitions for people, but you can also identify technology that is working, right? And correct me if I'm wrong, once you make an acquisition of technology, for example, you can run that parallel while you learn more about the business and about the customs or about whatever it is, and then slowly integrate that into the CargoWise platform. Is that the general understanding?
Not quite correct.
Okay.
So running the software in parallel is during the learning phase, but during that phase, we start to rewrite it on our core platform. Okay. Eventually, there's a few small exceptions to this when you're buying architectural things like a messaging engine or something, but almost everything gets rewritten and replaced because you get rid of all that technical debt. I mean, 46 acquisitions, so it's 46 different technology stacks, all different. Yeah. And imagine having to maintain 46 different technology stacks. That's more than any brain can handle. Yeah. So getting rid of them and putting into the core architecture is a very important, very clean way of having a fast growth company continue to be fast growth.
how do you identify targets? Is it based on the need, or do you have investment bankers around the world or whoever working for you out there constantly bringing you ideas?
We've only used investment bankers on 2 deals in the 46. All of the other ones have been self-originated. Most of them, my team or I or all of us know about, because we're in an industry which is very, very clearly able to identify who the suppliers are. We simply can ask customers. We have, on a global basis, we have Kuehne + Nagel, DHL, UPS, FedEx, Geodis, DSV, Usen, and many others of these brands, CMA, CGM, one of the biggest shipping lines in the world, Maersk. These are companies that know who their suppliers are worldwide, and it's typically their suppliers in one country are an opportunity for us to make that as an adaptation to our global system.
Yeah.
So we can research using Google and other tools. We can also research using customs websites, and we can research using our customers' information, because we can ask the question of the customer.
I've got one more question. One more question on the acquisition front, because I know how important it is that people understand this if they understand your business. Do you have like a due diligence framework? It's obviously you've done 46. It's repeatable, right? Are there any like big cogs or big items in there where you think those are the essential ingredients? Like, do you look for founder-run businesses or family-run businesses? Yeah, those are types of things.
Yeah, we typically are dealing with founders. The recent acquisition of Matchbox, that was we have spent a lot of time with Carl Marchese from Matchbox. It's a very important part of the thing going forward, and I have a very strong relationship with Carl, and that'll be a valuable thing for the future. We also are giving. There are usually an earn-out in those things, and there's usually a structure that allows us to feel pretty safe about the acquisition. We obviously do financial, tax, legal, and technical due diligence on these companies. But to be fair, I would have thought that cyber risk is also a big area of due diligence. We actually won't let somebody complete until they've closed off all of their penetration gaps, because these smaller companies often have weaker frameworks than we do. But the fact is that we're very good at those things, and we've built teams around that for a long time, and we can do a few acquisitions at a time in parallel, or slightly in parallel. We have a dedicated acquisition integration team, so it's not just diligence and acquisition; it's also post-acquisition, how you integrate them into the business. There's financial integration, there's operational integration, there's technical integration, and so forth. It's something we're very familiar with. And I just make the point again, I know that a lot of Australian companies have suffered from buying things overseas and getting themselves into trouble and then selling out and losing a lot of money. But we're talking about very small acquisitions generally. I mean, I think if you look at the size of the company, we're a $20 billion company. We're buying things worth 10, 20, $30 million. It's not material to the business. And we're doing it in large numbers rather than in large amounts. So a larger number of small companies, yes, they have some characteristics because they're small companies, but generally there's not a lot of failure there.
I think you're right in that I don't want to draw this parallel too much because it's tenuous at best, but like if people were to study Constellation, they would see lots of very small deals as well. For the vertical software that they go for, and it makes a lot of sense to me. But earlier you said that when you were repairing guitars, basically people were paying for your hands, your time, basically.
Yeah.
Now that's not the case. You said companies valued in the billions and billions of dollars, right? And today, WiseTech is spread throughout the world. You have certain teams that do certain functions. But I'm curious because I've heard a lot about the culture that you've fostered. And I guess if you could just speak to what you've tried to create and what you have created over time within the team at large, that would help people, I guess, wrap their head around how sustainable this is going forward.
So the most visible way of seeing that is to go to a website and have a look at the credo of the company and the mantras. And whilst these are not perfectly the culture of the company, there's a bit more than that in it. Those things are very they're striking in the fact that they are spoken about all the time. People quote it to each other. We know, for instance, that anyone can talk to anyone at any time for any reason, one of the mantras. We know that slower today, faster forever is a really important thing. Another one that I can quote you, which is I often quote to people, is that, and this is to do with innovation and being different. So different isn't necessarily better, but better is always different. So these are little slogans, little mantras that allow us to simplify a very complicated concept into something that people can quote and remember. And it becomes part of the culture that you're actually retaining this creative influence in the business. The Credo is a very powerful document. It's something that took me months and months and months with a lot of input from others to come up. It's very poetic, and it has I have trouble reading without getting a bit teary. It's that important.
Yeah, well, I've heard a few things like maybe a bit more tongue-in-cheek, beer o'clock and flexible working arrangements and these types of things, and the kind of learning.
This is the celebrations. So beer o'clock is that's a very Aussie joke when you think about it. What time is it? Oh, it must be beer o'clock now. So we typically used to have beer o'clock on a Friday. It's a little bit different now because of the hybrid work environment that we're in. But we always have a cake day once a month. We had one last week on Thursday. That was very exciting. We were talking about a lot of things to do with the company, and this is broadcast globally and recorded and shown for the staff. These are just celebrations of who we are and what we're doing and where we're going. And it's important because it's a binding influence on the company and the culture.
It is. I love all these ideas, but I won't get us too bogged down in these because I've got one more question on this, which is how important are you in the business now, right? It's a big company, but how important are you and the message that you bring to the business?
So the way to look at this is that there are 3,300 odd people in the business, and I'm just one person. I have an outsized influence historically because of the thing that I've created. But the thing that I've created that's of most value is the knowledge about how we do it, and the fact that that knowledge is shared widely with other people. Anytime I would think of that I've got something which is secret sauce or some magical skill or, whatever it is, I'll try to get that into documentation, into some form of words that other people can understand. My continuing skill is to see the future probably a little better than other people. But even then, I'm working with a large team of people, and I'm often sharing, how do you see the future? How do you actually pull the future from the present, and how are you able to do that? So I can't excuse myself from having, nearly 30 years of experience. It's just the way that it happens to be. But on the other hand, I'm still very motivated, and I'm healthy, and I'm very focused on how to grow WiseTech. And so I'm but my work in the company is all very future facing, and it's very long term as well. It's not something that's going to happen tomorrow or next week or next month. It's what's happening in 2 to 3 to 5 years time. And so, that most of the company is very focused on today, next week, next quarter, next year.
I know a huge proportion of the company are in software engineering or development roles. And I know that that's something that you're quite vocal about, is trying to get more people into the T and the E of STEM, trying to get everyone who is interested in these types of technical sciences and technology to take that leap and to do it. And I was chatting to Claire, one of your team members, in the lead up to this, and she gave me some fantastic stats. But there was one thing that clearly jumped out to me, which was the idea of earn and learn, how you can try to support people to study these things and support them financially through that process, and at the other end have a job at WiseTech. Can you talk to me about how important it is to you to look downstream for talent, and why that is so important to you?
Well, first of all, we've been supporting people, giving scholarships and sponsorships since 2000. Since I did my master's degree, the faculty hit me up pretty quickly because they knew that I ran a company and that I was a CEO. So I wasn't on the university campus for more than about a day before people were talking about sponsorships and scholarships. And I've sponsored, various degrees and exceptional students in degrees for more than 23 years. What I've realised is that that's not enough. You need to start very early on in primary school, and you need to also talk through society, through parents, through other folk like this, to people about the value of STEM. And I don't actually like the word STEM. I think it's a misleading term, but let's use it for the term to use now. We have to convince people that future high-value employment isn't digging holes in mountains and exporting iron ore, or living off the sheep's back, or and that we, the people in the businesses like WiseTech are actually competing for talented people with accounting, law, medicine, banking. And we need to be very strong at why a career in technology is a very high-value career. Now, WiseTech doesn't just have Earn and Learn. You've got to see Earn and Learn as the bridge between high school and university, and the bridge between education and employment. But we go right back to early high school and late primary school with our partnership with Grok Academy, which teaches technology subjects on a digital platform. And that is a very important piece of that. Earn and Learn takes, we would like to be able to engage with high school students from probably year 9 or 10 through to year 12, and we're doing more and more in that sort of program area. Part of it through Grok Academy and part of it with direct engagement with high schools. In fact, I've got a meeting with the head of school at Sydney Technical High School tomorrow, because I'm an alumni of that school, and I'm talking about these programs. Now, Earn and Learn, we would make offers about halfway through year 12, so we're making offers now. And those people join the company as a full-time employee once they finish their school year. They might take a holiday, but they'll join pretty much straight after that. And they'll then go to university part-time for maybe 4 years, maybe 5 years, depending on the extent of the degree. And they'll work at WiseTech full-time. They will have a full-time wage. That's a lot better than flipping burgers when you're at high school, when you're trying to support yourself at university. You work with professionals, so your learning is amplified many times that which you would get at university. I'm pretty confident when I say that the students that are doing Learn and Learn now are generally at the top of their classes in terms of marks and in terms of their actual abilities. If they are high achievers, if they get a distinction or a high distinction, we pay their HECS. So they don't have a HECS debt at the end of their degree, and they get as long as they're working full time, they get a share grant, which at the end of 4 years would probably be enough to buy a house, to put a deposit on a house.
Wow!
So full-time wage, no HECS debt, deposit on a house, a fantastically trained career that comes out the end as probably one of the most valuable software engineers you could get. That's a great outcome for them, and it's a great outcome for us because they're also very connected to us and very willing to be a part of the team.
It's an incredible thing. When I read about this, I just thought that was unbelievable. Do you have any rough idea, even just how many people at the very highest level might have gone through this? We're talking hundreds?
It's only run this year. The plan for 2023-24 is to bring on 50 people, and the plan for the year after that is 100.
Wow.
I think it's quite an important understanding that we've got really big plans to be a very substantial employer of youthful but very talented software engineering people, and you can see that in the people who we've already got on. I think it was 27 that we've hired last year. That is for the 2023 year, and I think we'll 28 was just corrected again. So I think we're trying for 50 this year, and we're trying for 100 the year after. And I think that's got to build a program up. You've got to get the university familiar with what we're doing, because the university finds this a little bit challenging. This is a bit different to their normal things.
For sure. Well, it's a wonderful opportunity, isn't it? For anyone if anyone is watching or listening to this that may be in the later stages of high school, go to the WiseTech website. It could be worth it many, many, many times over.
Well, you should look at Grok Academy if your children are in high school or primary school, because it's got great training for both primary and high school. It's really important to get your kids into that because it's a life skill for the future. The Earn and Learn is a very powerful way of having your child come through that. The Earn and Learn openings are still open until the 20th of November, so and it's on the website. But we even go further than that because there is the thing called the WiseTech Academy, which provides internal training for our own staff. It provides a number of other training opportunities for industry, including certifications and other things for industry. But it also provides a very powerful course called a Black Belt in Thinking, which is one of the core things we do at WiseTech. This is based on a book called It's Not Luck by Ellie Goldratt, but it's a powerful way of systems thinking. And that's a really, really important reason why WiseTech has become as successful as it is. Without that, we wouldn't be what we are today. So we teach that. It's a very low-cost course. You can read the book, It's Not Luck, and you can do the course called Black Belt in Thinking, and it really does change your life and gives you a meta skill for the rest of your life.
Right. I think everyone's going to...
That's the whole of the learning, so from very early childhood right through to adult learning and reskilling.
I think everyone's going to, after they've done watching or listening to this, they're going to go and Google many different things, but Black Belt in Thinking and the WiseTech website is it's going to be at the top of the list. I've got a couple more questions, and then I'm sure you've got many other things you want to be doing today. But I've got a couple more questions, if I may. One is technical degrees, technology as an industry, software. All of a sudden, we've got the quote unquote AI tools, ChatGPT, GPT-4, Google Bard, a lot of these things that people are using to help them write code, to help them learn a new language, whatever the case may be. How does that impact how does that impact WiseTech, I guess, is the most important question.
So I think we're at the beginning stages of a new technology. I'll say evolution, because I think a revolution is a bit too strong.
Okay.
We've had numerous technical evolutions from the beginning of computing. We've had, the invention of the microcomputer was a breakthrough. The IBM PC was a huge breakthrough. The ability to have a graphical operating system like the Mac or Windows was a huge breakthrough. The amount of computer power that you can put into a computer, into a graphics adapter, is a huge breakthrough. Smartphones, iPhones and Android phones are a huge breakthrough. I think this is just another evolutionary step that has enormous benefits for business as long as you understand it. The first thing is, when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're not talking about intelligence. What I say is it's big A artificial and a tiny little I intelligent. Okay, ChatGPT appears to be intelligent, and this is the problem with humans, that they ascribe a human-like quality. We anthropomorphize something if it appears to be human. But ChatGPT can also have massive hallucinations and get things completely wrong. And you can also do all sorts of weird things with it if you know how it works. It's also an incredibly useful tool, and it does things much faster than a human could do before. So just like many other aspects of computing, it's more powerful and can do things better, provided the thing that you're talking about is well-formed. I use it for research. We use Copilot in the development area. This helps developers. We're using Copilot across Office 365, Microsoft 365 now. We're an early adopter of that. I've used Bard. I've used a number of other AI tools. But when we say AI, we're talking about what is actually called narrow AI, where it does one thing really well, but nothing else. And if you drive a Tesla, and have you got full self-drive on your Tesla?
No, I've got auto steer, but not full self-drive.
Well, I have full self-drive, and it works, sort of, but often doesn't.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed.
So, look, I'm happy that it's developing and it's getting better all the time, but we're a long way away from autonomous vehicles, despite, many people saying that we're going to have autonomous vehicles in 2019. We're not even close. Not even close.
Yeah.
And I think, again, we tend to ascribe, we anthropomorphize. We put human qualities to machines Machines don't have a survival instinct. They've never gone through evolution. They've never had, this billions of years of evolving and surviving. It's not like they're going to take over the world. They're not intelligent in the way that you understand and I understand intelligence. And we're a long, long way away from AGI, which is general intelligence, right? Artificial general intelligence. I think if you look at these things, they are powerful tools, but they are just like many other powerful tools in the past. It's very important for CEOs and for technologists to extract every last skerrick of value out of those tools, but they're not about to take over the world, and not even close.
Well, that's reassuring to a lot of folks that maybe are a bit worried about it. So one more question on the company. As far as I could tell, like you said, market capitalization, the entire worth of the company is about $20 billion at the time of recording, about $820 million of revenue. How big is the opportunity that you're chasing? WiseTech's known for its growth, its global business. What do you say to investors when they ask you that question?
So the best way I can do this is, instead of referring to addressable markets, which anybody that analyzes addressable markets it's a rear windows look at legacy software and what it generates. So it's not very helpful if you're an innovator and you're creating new things. I'll give you a good example. Here's the thought experiment. What was the addressable market for the iPhone on the day it was released?
Probably whatever Nokia was making at the time.
It's like 1% of what it is today.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the point. You can't tell an addressable market. It's a rear window looking thing. So a better way of looking at this is to look at global product, gross global product, which is about $105 trillion. And then logistics, the supply chain part, the logistics part of the supply chain that drives that is between 12 and 14% of that number. That is what the cost of logistics is. So let's call that $15 trillion. Now, our contribution to that might be to take 1% of that. That's a very top-down way of looking at it, but that's what I think the addressable market might be in the long term. That's still a very, very, very big number.
That's huge. It's enormous. Yeah. I don't know many Aussie businesses that could say something like that and for it to be reasonable, right? Like,
look, what I just said is a very rational perspective. It's just not the way that anybody else looks at it. And I don't necessarily want to copy other people because they've got their way of looking at these things. But if you think about it in the very long term, I don't think there wouldn't have been a single person on the IPO that said will be $20 billion in 7 years. That would not have been a single piece of rhetoric that anybody would dare to say. That's what I thought, but I didn't say it out loud because it would look like I was crazy.
Yeah.
But here we are.
Okay, so I've got two final questions for you, but before I get to those, I just want everyone, if you do have really anyone in your life that wants to learn about business, about engineering and technology, head to the WiseTech website. If you're a shareholder, you can find out information, and the investor relations part of the website. There'll be a link in the show notes for all of that and more. You mentioned that one of the mantras is slower today, faster forever. And one of the questions that I had for you was around like rituals that you might practice either daily, weekly, yearly, whatever the case may be. But I wonder if that applies to you too in the way you grow as an individual. What are maybe some of the things that you do to slow yourself down to go faster in the long term? Because anyone listening to the first half of the conversation would think, wow, Richard, he's got fantastic memory, seems to read a lot, he crams a lot of stuff in there. What do you do as part of that to make it sustainable, I guess?
Well, it's different for different people, but in referring to myself particularly, I mean, slower today, faster forever came from behaviors that people saw of me. They were frustrated that I wasn't immediately jumping on things and going really quickly. And I'm going, now let me just think about that a bit. I don't think that maybe there's something more to that. Let's just not rush. In fact, another way of saying this, and I've said this to many people, calm is a superpower. People get very excited and want to react instantaneously to something that's just happened without the analysis to actually understand what it is. Now, if the building's on fire, that's a different thing. You've got to react very quickly. If there's some imminent danger that is ever present and going to happen without you intervening, you have to move very quickly. But where you have time and you can make an informed decision and you can think about what the best possible outcome would look like and how to build that best possible outcome, you should spend the time. A lot of people want to react very quickly when thoughtfulness is a very important feature of successful outcomes. That you don't build a business the size of WiseTech by making snap decisions the whole way along. Sometimes you have to, but most rarely, almost all the time, you have the opportunity to think about things. I mean, we bought Bloom and Envase in February this year, about 900 million Australian dollars total cost. We were probably working on that strategy for more than a year, and we were working on the acquisitions themselves for more than 6 months. That's not rushing.
Yeah.
Matchbox, I was talking to Carl in 2018 and didn't manage to get it across the line until just a couple of weeks ago. I think there's calm is a superpower, and taking your time to make the right decisions and understand the import of those decisions and how to best maximize them is a very important thing. The other thing is not making decisions is also very bad as well. So if you're just someone who doesn't like to make decisions, that's not the idea. You've got to make a decision. You've just got to make sure it's the best possible decision given the time and the pressures that you're under. And so that is a characteristic that people often think that I'm vacillating because I'm not deciding on something, because I want to make sure that I've got the decision right. Now, if it's urgent, I'll go very quickly. But most of the time, you've got the opportunity to think for a day or a week or a month, and it's okay, because you get better outcomes if you. And sometimes, here's a really interesting thing: a lot of decisions disappear because they weren't important in the first place, and when you don't decide, they just don't become important anymore. They go away. So this is one of those things: is that people confuse important with urgent. They think that urgent means important. Urgent means urgent. Important means urgent, important, and often urgent things disappear of their own accord.
I have a bit of a triage system that I run in my own life, Richard. If people send me an email, and people will know who sent me an email, that if it's urgent, they'll text me or they'll try to call me. And if they don't get through to me the first time, if they call back again, then I know it's really important. So now I better get to it. Otherwise, it could be in the artificial urgent bucket or the high priority bucket for them, but for me, it might not be. So I've got...
Sorry, there's one more thing to add to that. I think, and this is a really important thing, it is also very important to decide what not to do. When you buy businesses, there's the businesses that we've acquired, there are a lot of things that businesses do that have not generated anything of value for them or their customers, and not doing them, whilst it feels bad because there's inertia behind these things, sort of an inversion of that sunk cost effect. Stopping it doesn't actually cause any problems. And if you say that if I stop doing this tomorrow, what bad would happen? And the most bad thing that happens is people go, oh, I don't like it. My customers may not like it. Well, why won't they like it? I mean, if this is not an important thing, why are we doing it? And it's really, and you think about not doing things, it's really important to know what not to do in the future, to stop doing things that don't produce much value.
I love that. I'm just thinking about all the things that I could probably just take this new owner lens to, the blank canvas, if you will, from earlier on, and just think about that. One final thing is, there's a lot of people that listen to this probably, I'm not making their mind up for them, Richard, and they should speak to a financial advisor and all that. They'll probably, at the very least, be putting WiseTech on their watch list if it's not already in their portfolio. If someone out there is looking at the WiseTech business and what you've created along with the team, I'd love to know just maybe a couple of things that they could keep in their mind after this conversation to make them think, well, I can keep tabs on how Richard and the team are going. Like, what metrics or what yardstick are you moving towards, so that they know that you're doing, frankly, a good job?
Wow, that's a really complicated question, isn't it?
No, it is.
I'm going to do two things. I'm going to say that I'm going to refer you to my auntie asking to invest, but asked me to put her on the chairman's list in 2016 when the IPO. I'll tell you that story, and I'll start with this. This is a technology company. It's global in scale and reach. It is critically important to the world of logistics. And the world of logistics is in a little bit of a downturn at the moment, even though WiseTech is doing quite well relatively to that. It's still not, it has a little bit of softness in that market, but logistics has always been and will always be a critically important part of the world's processes. To live, you have to have logistics. And so because it's a tech company, and tech companies are highly valued and high growth by nature, because we're in a critical industry that is itself high growth and critical by nature, I think it's one of the safer investments. And by the way, with this exception of my auntie, and I'll tell you that story, I have never told anybody to buy WiseTech shares. Not once. I've said, make your own mind up, form your own opinion. All the information is there. Please make your decision the best you want. If you want to buy, buy. If you don't want to buy, don't buy. I'm going to do the best job I can running the company. Your job is to decide whether you want to be an investor. I'm not a promoter of WiseTech. I'm a promoter of WiseTech shares. I'm a promoter of WiseTech's abilities and capabilities and its journey to the future, which is very powerful. Sure. Now, my auntie, who I'm quite close to, called me a few weeks before the IPO, and she said, I want to invest. I want to put money in because I want to make sure that I give my grandchildren a good education, and I want to have some money to do that. I said, well, Wendy, is her name, I want you to read the entire prospectus from end to end, and if you can answer questions from it, I will let you invest and I'll put you on the chairman's list. But other than that, I'm not going to do it. And she put an amount of money, and it wasn't a huge amount of money, but let's call it tens of thousands. And to make her safe, I gave her, I doubled it by putting my own money in against hers and said, that's a gift. So she had double what her investment was. But of course, since that time, it's gone up 20 times. And so she's extremely happy. And I think her and her husband look at the share market every day and look at WiseTech, and they often call me and text me and tell me how happy they are and so forth. But I truly, truly want people to want to be a WiseTech shareholder without having to me to tell them that they have to be a WiseTech shareholder. They should make their mind up. And if there are plenty of investors in the world, WiseTech is one of them, but everybody's got to make their mind up themselves.
I like that. And I think it's wonderful. And there's more and more analysts and investors that now cover the company. And I would say if anyone does read those reports, just remember to keep in mind all of what we've talked about today, about everything that has transpired to get WiseTech to where it is now, not just from Richard, but from thousands of people. Well, Richard, this has been a fantastic conversation and very wide-ranging, quite personal at times, but I think it speaks to the legacy of the business you've built and how it's most likely going to keep growing for many, many years to come. So I really appreciate you being so generous with your time. On behalf of the Australian Shareholders Association and the Rask community, I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Owen.